You are watching the Writing Community Chat Show. Hello everybody, welcome to Wednesday. The Writing Community Chat Show is back again with another fantastic guest. It's going to be a fun show, and it's exciting to be back. And as you can see, if you're watching this on YouTube, Mr. Hooley is sat next to me. Hello.
Hello.
Hello. It's nice to have you back.
Thank you. It's nice to be back.
I mean, because you were missing when I spoke on Monday with a bonus show. Oh, let's remove that. That's the bit. It's a bit premature. Yes, on Monday we had a bonus show, but you weren't available. But it was good nonetheless.
I was very busy with life stuff on Monday, but I did watch the show back, and it was an absolutely fantastic show. So
it was.
Well done, Mr. Aggett.
Yes, thank you. Josie Lloyd was on the show, and she was fantastic indeed. There's a few things going on in the world of Twitter today that tickled me pink, Chris. One thing was people drawing the Shrek from memory. Have you seen this?
I have not seen this.
It's an impressive task, and there's some fine examples, and by fine I mean horrendously hilarious, of the Shrek drawings. But apparently it's like an anniversary of Shrek, so people are drawing from mind. Connor, hello to you in the chat. Thank you for joining us. He says life stuff getting in the way of writing is the worst, but it does seem to be the most common thing.
It is definitely the worst, 100%.
And also, I want to point out this tweet that I popped up just earlier, which I find fantastic. And the fact that we are in the world of writing, this is very applicable to us. So, hello, Mario. This tweet from Stephen King defending no, coronavirus is not like The Stand. It's not anywhere near as serious, and it's eminently survivable. Keep calm and take all responsible precautions. Dear God. It's because it's blurry. That's what I'm blaming. And then someone replied, and how the hell would you know? Did you even read that book? That is beautiful.
I love it. I love how it's a sports ball fan as well. Just taking that sort of stereotype to a whole new level.
I mean,
calling him out.
Yeah.
But, I mean, he did read it, obviously, because he wrote it, but then he read it again and then wrote a bigger version. So if you've had the pleasure of reading that, it's absolutely fantastic. So The Stand, although when I did read The Stand and then coronavirus did happen, I was like, this is very similar.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit worrying, I guess, if people are getting these too close to home, especially when they're talking about sort of made things.
Yeah, Stephen King with The Dead Zone as well. The character, I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but he's very much like Donald Trump, and he gets elected.
Oh dear. So, anyway, let's move on because I want to get tonight's guest on. But there's just one more thing I want to talk about, and this is part of the community as well. Someone that we know in the community is doing this, and I think it's fantastic. So if you can see this, this is something called. Let me get the top of it because I can't remember. Books for Vaccines, and it's not like give your book in, you can have a vaccine. It's raising money for a charity that helps with these sort of things. And E.G. Radcliffe, who's been on the show before, she's a great part of our community and our circle. Her book is currently being bid for, and it's $15, and that money goes towards that charity. and she's giving away her series, the 3 books that we've talked about before. They look fantastic. What do you think about that idea, Chris? I think it's great.
I love it, and I know obviously EG's someone that we've had on the show, and we've had a lot of guests on our show that are actually doing this as well, and there's some brilliant stuff to bid for. Just absolutely phenomenal, and obviously it's for a really good cause as well, so definitely, if you haven't already, check that out, because I mean, just look at it. It's like a book lover's, I was going to say wet dream there, but I'm going to say dream.
Well, you have now. You may as well.
Book lover's dream.
It's a book lover's wet dream. If you look there on the right hand side as well, a signed box set of 3 hardbacks. It's going for £800, and that is going to a charity. So it's clearly an amazing idea, and it's something that should be recognised, which we are doing. So well done to you guys who set that up, and I hope you do very well. And clearly, by looking at that, £500, £200, they're going to do very well for these charities.
Yeah, so, Phoebe Morgan, well done.
Yeah, definitely. Is that who's doing it? Phoebe Morgan?
Yeah, the fantastic author and editor.
There you go.
Now charitable genius.
Heard it from the horse's mouth.
That's rude, but okay.
So let's do the beer token book promotion and get our guest on, because it's very exciting. And tonight's beer token book promotion is also by someone from our community in our circle, and what we consider our friends of the writing community. And that person is Catherine Yaffe. The Web They Wove is the second book in the Tangled Web series, and it's available for pre-order right now at 99 cents, which is a bargain as an ebook. And it's out on 28th of May, which is just next week, or is it next Friday? Soon.
Yeah, it's
very soon.
Yeah, next Friday.
Yeah. The gripping sequel to The Lie She Told. Not all killers are who they first seem. Do you know any killers, Chris?
Not personally, no.
No. Okay. Okay. The Web They Wove. The mutilated body of a young female is found in a popular recreation ground in Leeds city centre. Leeds. DI Ziggy Thornes and his team are once assigned to close the case. With little to no forensic evidence left at the scene, at first Ziggy struggles to put the pieces together. When a second body turns up in the same place, pressure from higher up and the media mounts as fear spreads throughout the city. Realizing that the victims have been held captive prior to their gruesome deaths, Ziggy delves deeper and relentlessly chases down every lead, taking him to breaking point. When the investigation leads him dangerously close to home, will time run out before the tangled web of evil he's uncovered destroys everything Ziggy holds dear? That genuinely sounds like a fantastic book, and definitely up there with the tense psychological thrillers. So do check that out, and support the authors that support the show. All right, Chris, I'm getting there. Just pointing out, this cover is fantastic. I really like it. Very, very well done on that cover. Ross is in the house. Hello, Ross. Fashionably late. Okay. Yes. Anyway, so let's get tonight's guest on, because this is going to be very exciting. Chris, are you ready?
Yeah, definitely.
So, ladies and gentlemen, she is a guest from the UK, and she's about to release the 3rd book, The Murder of Graham Catton. A twisty, atmospheric psychological thriller. Readers will keep flipping the pages right up to the gasp-worthy final bombshell, and that is by Publishers Weekly, which sounds fantastic. Ladies and gentlemen, Katie Lowe. Hello to you.
Hi.
First of all, thank you so much for joining us. It's an absolute pleasure to have you here.
I'm great, thank you. How are you doing?
Not too bad. I'm just that's Katie Lowe. Weird accent is down to Chris's disbelief at my ability to pronunciate. I have no idea why you'd think that. But Katie, honestly, thank you for joining us. And everything well? How's Katie's life?
Yeah, it's good. I'm busy at the minute. I'm not gonna lie, and not with writing stuff. I'm working on the vaccine rollout in my day job at the moment. So it's long hours, busy day. I'm not doing nothing heroic. I'm in comms. So
well, that's heroic. It's actually
helps.
Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah, no.
What does that involve in the comms? Do you get any kind of crazies on the phone?
I expected. I was armed and dangerous when I took on the job. I was ready to kind of like fight with all the anti-vaxxers, you know. But actually, it's not been too bad, you know. Mostly, it's just making sure that people know when they're supposed to be getting the vaccine and where they need to go for it. You know,
Wow.
It's great. The thing about working in the NHS or turning up in the NHS after never having worked in it is that everyone there is amazing. You know, they're all so committed and, you know, brilliant. And I'm, you know, doing my 12 hours a day from home on my sofa. I feel very lazy.
I suppose as much as we kind of think it's kind of normalized these days, the coronavirus, the whole thing, that at some point we might look back at this as like a part of history. You know, people talk about it. I worked in the coronavirus, and it could be an essential part of the process.
Yeah, well, and that's part of the reason why I wasn't planning on going back to work. And then when I was approached about this job, I was like, oh, like I can't not, you know. I've spent the last, you know, year feeling a bit useless during the pandemic, not really sure what to do. So, you know, someone comes along and offers you an opportunity to do anything, you know, I sort of jumped on it. So yeah, it's great. I love it.
And do you have a favorite story from it so far, Katie? Have you got one that like you're going to tell future generations? This phone call, you're not going to believe.
You know, the main thing has been like, you know, it's not really been. I've not been, you know, the one having these conversations, but I deal with the site managers a lot. You know, the people who are kind of on the ground dealing with it, and the stories constantly of people who, you know, like especially when it was going out to the, you know, the older generations and the more vulnerable, you know, of kind of very, very, very big emotional reactions on the part of people receiving the vaccines. You know, it's sort of things where, you know, when you're there on site and you sort of see it happen, you get goosebumps. You know, that's the kind of thing for me where I think I'm never going to forget it. Do you know?
Wow.
Yeah. Oh,
it's weird to think that, you know, if some people are anti-vaccinations and some people just get on with it, but then there are some people, like you mentioned there, that are really sort of grateful to be in that position and literally feel like you're saving their lives at that point.
Yeah, and it's such a relief for them, you know, especially, you know, grandparents in particular who've been stuck indoors for, you know, for a year, not be able to see their families, you know, kind of when they've come around and they've had their second vaccinations now, you know, it's amazing. It's like I say, it's goosebumps. It's brilliant.
So let's get on to the world of writing then, because that's what we're here to talk about. And you know, there's a lot of stuff going on with your world in your world of writing at the moment. Let's take it back before we get into that and talk about how writing became a process in your life. Where did that come from?
Well, I was always one of those kids that's got a notebook. You know, I'm kind of always telling stories, writing things down, wanting to write something, but I never really wanted to do fiction. That was kind of something that happened by accident, I'll be honest. You know, my plan was always that I would become an academic first. You know, I always wanted to go back to uni, do my PhD. You know, still attempting to do the PhD even now. It's been 10 years and I will just not let it go. But you know, then I started a blog when I was in my early 20s, I think, which is kind of where the Fat Girl PhD thing comes from. You know, that's sort of Twitter handle and things like that. And that was where I got my agent. You know, we worked on the blog together, and it was only when my nonfiction book failed to sell that I kind of went back to, you know, the idea of writing fiction, which I'd done, you know, as a kid. I was on Newsround as a press packer at 9, which I'm very proud of.
Wow, that's amazing.
But that was kind of my only real success in fiction at that point, you know, writing about a made-up roller coaster. And I will admit, up until that point, I was absolutely convinced that fiction was just witchcraft. You know, I would never be able to do it. Creating something out of nothing is just madness. And I was convinced that I'd never figure it out. And I think I wrote half a book and then I wrote a whole book, and neither of them were any good. Wow. You know, real dragging through the mud, no real plot, no real characterization, nothing really redeemable about them. But you do have to figure it out as you go along, don't you? And it wasn't until I'd been through all that I kind of, you know, felt like it was working for me and got anywhere with it, really.
I mean, there would have been a lot of people in your shoes at that point where they've written a few things that didn't kind of do what they wanted to, and maybe you've stepped back or given that up. I mean, what made you think or believe that it's worth pursuing? What was that? Was there a drive there, or did you just always have that belief that you would get there?
To be honest, it was I never really knew what I would do if I wasn't writing in my spare time. It was just, it was the what that was the problem for me. I would always sit down and want to be writing, but I just I kind of didn't quite have the right idea. And for me, professionally, work wise, personally, in terms of writing, I have failed so many times at so many things, and I've said it, to pretty much everyone I know. Like, I think you have to get used to failing at things to make it as a writer. I think it's absolutely fundamental to it, because, even now, like my second book, the amount of bad drafts of that came before I had anything even vaguely resembling something that would fulfill my contract.
Wow.
So I think you kind of have to just accept failure as a part of the process, and I mean, for me anyway.
I think that's key in life in general. I think if you haven't failed in certain areas, you're not going to grow as a character or grow as experience and use that life experience even for the creative side. So I think it's essential. Yeah. So what happened? You mentioned that you met your agent through blogging.
Yeah, it's Juliet Mushins. She's very big on Twitter, and she and I got into an argument over whether a certain actor was attractive on Twitter.
Always the best way to start with a publisher.
As you do, yeah. And I think she'd come across. I seem to remember her saying that she'd come across my blog from her housemate. Her housemate had read my blog, and so she was sort of vaguely aware of my stuff. But after that, we arranged to meet for a coffee. She'd read some more of my stuff, and it was all very informal at that point. I kind of signed with her initially on a kind of a verbal agreement, like maybe we'll do some stuff together, who knows. And I mean, I'm so lucky, because she's one of the best agents in the business, and this was 2013, so I think it was before The Miniaturist, which I think was huge for Juliet, and for obviously Jessie Burton's a huge client for her now, so it was kind of I've always felt really lucky that she and I met at that stage. I think I managed to get on board just in time.
Yeah, was that quite intimidating for you at the time? Because obviously Juliet, like anyone who's in writing now, probably knows who she is. And would be like, oh my God, she's actually speaking to me, and we're talking about this weird random thing about whether this person's attractive or not. Was that the same for you, or was it just completely natural from the beginning?
It's funny because at that point it hadn't really occurred to me that the blog was anything I could sell, and I hadn't considered writing fiction, and the stuff that I was still considering doing was academic stuff, which I knew she didn't really represent. So it was surprisingly chill until she said, maybe we could do a book based on the blog. And then suddenly it was like, oh God, I've got completely the wrong idea of what this is about. So, it was, I think I would have been more stressed had I known what I was actually, what I was actually doing, I think.
Can we ask about who the attractive person was and what your side was?
Well, it was Damien Lewis.
Okay, interesting.
I can see why you would argue about that. He would definitely divide opinion.
Damien Lewis.
Yeah, so I was pro, she was against.
Okay.
Yeah. So with Juliet coming up with that idea for writing a book about a blog, was she hoping that, obviously taking your fan base that really enjoyed your blog and that loved reading you, whenever you produce something, was she hoping to harness that, or was she just saying, do you know what, this is kind of a bit exciting, I think obviously you could do that, with the experience that you've got? Like, how was that whole process and how did it unfold?
Yeah, so I think she felt that there was a story in it. I mean, Juliet's got an amazing eye for a narrative. Even now with my, with fiction, like I will send her a bad draft and she will find what the narrative actually is in my messy draft. So I think, because I'd blogged a lot about my, previously I'd had a lot of issues with my health, and I'd kind of been through some stuff with that, I made quite a compelling story, I think, as she saw it. And also I did have, I was very, very lucky in that, like, Twitter was a very nice place at that point. It's still a fun place, but it's a little bit more rough and tumble now, I think. And I had a lot of people there who did read my blog and were kind of willing to share my stuff. And thank you, Connor. I appreciate that. It was I think there was probably something there, but what was interesting was the feedback from the publishers was kind of that the platform wasn't quite big enough at that point. And I think potentially they would have taken it on had I kind of put the time in and built the platform further. But I at that point was kind of having some slight reservations about whether I wanted to be kind of public figure in that way, where my life story is the product. Do you know what I mean? Like it was. Yeah. I got a little bit nervous about it, so I didn't go down that road.
Okay, so Katie, how did you switch from being someone who's very academic in terms of loving studying and writing in an academic way to then switch into fiction, which you've obviously said as well was one of the last things that you ever kind of thought of doing? But then obviously when this idea crops up, how did you sort of tackle that? How did you go, do you know what? Yeah, I'm going to do this. And what was that process like?
Well, I sort of treated it like taking myself back to school. My PhD that I was doing was in English at that point. Books were still my life, and fiction was my main interest. But I'd always read it in a different way. The thing for me was going back to it and thinking, how exactly are these things put together? And that took a long time for me to figure out. I think if you're not thinking as a writer, it becomes second nature after a while. I think for most people who do write, to think about plot and characterization and pace and tone and all these things that kind of make up a good book. But at that point, I was thinking about God knows even what, to be totally honest with you. When I was picking up a book, I was just enjoying the book. And even then, it wasn't until because I was still working at that point. I had a job in marketing and events at that point, and it wasn't really until I got really, really burnt out, and I took a couple of weeks off. Just booked some holiday, turned off my phone. I bought literally a burner phone, like a drug dealer would have. I was like, my mum has this number, so if anything happens, someone can contact me. There's literally it. I'm unavailable to the rest of the planet. And I sat down and I bought The Goldfinch by Donna Tartt and a bunch of psychological thrillers. And I hadn't read a thriller in years. It had been so long. And I just spent 2 weeks just reading books, reading purely, what I guess you'd call commercial fiction, And the thing for me was I had spent a long time in the literary fiction area, studying literary fiction and all that kind of thing. And I found when I picked up these thrillers and, this sort of more commercial fiction that I had so much fun. It was the most fun I had had in years. And it was almost like then that it clicked. It was like, that's what I want to do. That's the feeling that I want to give someone else. And that was the point where, for me, it kind of clicked as what kind of fiction I want to do and what I actually want to write. And, from then it's almost been like, it's kind of one of those things where it's so formative, you just don't look back afterwards. You know exactly what you're doing after that.
I really love the idea of someone who's previously, they know they want to write and they write a few things and it kind of goes well, but not quite what they wanted. And then they sit back and think, I want to read this and I'll read these things. And then that's what I want to write. I'm going to do this. I love the idea that people approach it in that manner and really, that's what I like. I want to give this effect to the world. So once you've harnessed that and you come through that process, how did you take that from what you knew and then begin writing in that genre that it was kind of, I guess, unfamiliar to you apart from what you've read? How did you change a lot of your writing style to adapt to that?
Yeah, to an extent. I mean, the Furies, which was my first book, that was slightly, it was, the sort of voice of it. I think now, now that I'm writing, Murder of Graham Catton is much more kind of psychological thriller, straight down the line. The Furies was still, when I look back, not quite the thing that I thought I was trying to do. Do you know what I mean? Like, I'm still proud of it, and writing that book was one of the best experiences of my life, but it's not the book I thought I was writing at the time, But the way that I kind of went about it was, I read huge amounts of fiction. I would get up first thing in the morning, because I had a really busy job at that point. So I would get up at 5 a.m. and I would write for a couple of hours. And then the last thing I would do before bed after work was I would read something that was relevant to that genre, almost so that the next morning I would wake up in the right mindset to start writing, and it was very much, a case of, almost like I described it once as sort of, like you imagine like a watchmaker kind of picking things apart and seeing how things work. It was almost that kind of logic of like, I'm reading this book and I'm seeing how this author does it, and they're doing it better than I know how to do it. And I'm not going to do that exactly, but I can see how it works and how I would like to replicate it, in a different way, and how it might apply to my book. Made hundreds of pages of notes, notebooks full of them, just ideas and things.
Like, Katie, that whole thing is just, it sounds amazing and very brave to pick up a psychological thriller as you're about to go to sleep, because from my experience of reading them, you would probably get no sleep whatsoever. So the fact that you then wake up at 5 o'clock and write, like, I've seen this on Twitter quite a few times of the 5 a.m. like writers club, and I'm like, are you actually insane? Like, how do you do it? So how was that? Like, just getting up at 5 a.m. and writing, did it come naturally every time, or was it a struggle?
It did then. It doesn't so much now, I have to say. I think I'm getting old. It was something that, then it fit quite nicely into my life. I do still prefer to write in the morning. I find that there's a certain amount of clarity that I get in the morning that once the phone starts ringing, and once things start going wrong with the work day, which it always does in kind of every job that I've had, it's always kind of fixing things. I think once that starts happening, you lose that kind of clear concentration. So there's benefits to it. The other thing is, for me, I do find kind of getting straight out of bed, coffee, desk, nothing else, no phone, nothing, is the best way to get going. I think as soon as you start to think about it, you're screwed. Suddenly, when you think about it, it is actually 5 a.m. and this is the worst idea you've ever had.
Yeah. I'm not sure, Chris. I like to experience things for the sake of our channel and vlog things. Perhaps that getting up at 5 a.m. to do some writing in the next couple of weeks may be a thing I should do as an experience. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, you can do that by yourself, mate, because there's no way I'm doing that.
Thanks for the teamwork. So talk to us then about, you mentioned how you originally wrote in a way that you thought was psychological thriller, almost that what you're writing now is a much more fine-tuned version of that. So let's talk about your new book. Can you give us and the audience a bit of a lowdown about what that book is about, and then we'll talk about how that kind of came around?
Yeah, sure. So it's called Murder of Graham Catton. It's about a woman whose husband was murdered a decade ago, and his murder becomes the subject of a true crime podcast, which puts her in the spotlight, as potentially a suspect, while they clear the original person accused. So it was for me. I mean, the thing for me is I have like a real guilty pleasure around true crime podcasts. I'm like, I love them. I've watched every show. I've listened to every single one. I'm obsessed with them. But I always had it in the back of my mind that it would be awful if suddenly they came into your life and started digging up things from your past and broadcasting them to the world. Like, for me, I was like, that's my worst nightmare. So Well, it was a lot of fun, and again, this is where Juliet, kind of is is the hero, because I my first draft of that, in a terrible irony, had a pandemic in it, which it does not anymore. This was 2018. I think I sent her a really bad draft of it. And she was like, it doesn't need the pandemic. The pandemic is, in the way. The main story is the podcast. And she kind of, spelled it out for me. She was like, this is what you're writing and you're just not seeing it, So that really helped. But it took so many drafts to get this book right. I mean, honest to God. And even then, that's where, when I say the Furies was, slightly different from what I was trying to do. With this book, the second draft, I think, the second or third, I think the final version I'm going to call the fifth, second or third, I found myself skewing way off into a sort of literary fiction direction that did not suit the book at all. And it was a weird thing, because I think it was kind of an identity crisis on my part. I think I kind of freaked out over, I signed a contract for 2 books and I can't do it, and I need to do something different, but I can't do something too different. But oh my God, and it just, because the Furies was somewhere in that in-between space, I just really struggled with this. And it got easier when I decided to sort of fully commit to doing it as a psychological thriller, and doing that right, rather than trying to do something in between.
Can I just ask you about when you mentioned that you were going to put a pandemic in the story, and that you kind of advised not to? There's a lot of new authors that will try, I guess, to make the story as entertaining as possible and put many factors in there. I mean, it's something that a lot of people will run into. And was that explained to you as why that wasn't needed? And is there some advice you could pass on that would suggest to new authors that maybe don't overcomplicate things because of this? Definitely.
I mean, the main thing that I've learned, again, from Juliet, is that the short, succinct pitch is everything. It's huge for your book. And I think, the way that I described the book to you just now, woman's husband murdered a decade ago, true crime podcast digs it up. You almost, and I'm speaking exclusively for kind of commercial fiction here, I don't think the same rules apply in sort of, different genres, but you need to give your agent that opportunity to be able to sell it so quickly, because editors receive so many books, and so many pitches and so many submissions. And I think if you want it to sell, you've got to be able to kind of, give them something that works like a pitch. And, that's, it's one of those things where, for me, you find, it is the kill your darlings thing. I think when you first start out, you're like, oh, that's a good idea, and that's a good idea, and that's a brilliant idea, and you end up with this kind of like trifle of story that's just, it's a big wobbling mess. And actually, the story is more compelling when you can kind of distill it down to one really, really, really good narrative that is gripping in itself. I think the thing that I've learned from my many drafts of this book is that when I was adding more stuff in, it was because the main story was too weak. It was almost like I was trying to add stuff in to compensate for the fact that the main narrative wasn't compelling enough. And so I suppose my advice would be to have confidence in your main story and commit to it, rather than trying to kind of throw the kitchen sink in there. It's better to do one thing really well.
So, Katie, it's great being a fan of these true crime podcasts and going, oh, I love that. I think it's a brilliant idea and a great way of presenting the narrative. But what are the challenges of actually writing about a true crime podcast in a fiction novel? Because obviously you've got certain elements that people expect to see, and then you've got the challenge of presenting the story as it's coming through the podcast.
Yeah, form was really difficult for it, because I found myself agonizing over whether to have transcripts or how to seed in the podcast. Whether to have multiple narrators, different things like that. And in the end, the way that I did it was she's listening, she and her family are listening to the podcast, and it's kind of drip fed through via her kind of reactions to it, which works as a device because she herself, you're never quite sure until the end whether she did it or not. So it's, her kind of reacting strongly to certain things doesn't necessarily mean that they're wrong. I've seen other books. There's a book called Girl 11, I think it's called, by Amy Suter Clark, which is also a true crime podcast novel, and I think that's coming out pretty soon as well. And I was lucky enough to get that in proof, and it's really, really good. This is me absolutely failing on my ass at publicity things by being like, read this true crime podcast book instead. But it's really, really good. But it was really interesting for me because it's almost the complete reverse of mine, because she's doing it from the podcast host's perspective. So it was fascinating to see another author do it in exactly the opposite way. And I think there's a lot of there's going to be a lot of different ways of doing it. I have a feeling, I'm certainly not going to be the only person writing about true crime podcasts as a device. I'm sure there are far more creative ways of doing it than I came up with, but it's certainly a decision that I kind of agonized over and wrote in a very, many different versions of before I kind of landed on the right one.
Yeah. So if somebody was going to tackle it, then what advice would you give them to do that? Like, if you just had to give them one piece and just say, look, from my experience, do this.
That's a really good question. I mean, I suppose the thing for me is you have to get the tone right when it comes to conveying the podcast. They've got certain elements that for me just absolutely nail a true crime podcast. Certain things like staccato violins going off in the background, different voices coming in over each other during the trailer, kind of conflicting with each other, things like that, where if you can communicate that, you can usually kind of communicate most of the rest of what's going to happen in the podcast without having to transcribe the whole thing. It's almost a less is more type approach, that would be my advice, I guess. I mean, was
there any true crime podcast in particular that you were kind of leaned on for your sort of research, or have you got a favorite one?
So one that I found really interesting was Undisclosed, which I don't know if you guys have heard of it. It's by Rabia Chowdhury and a couple of others. So Rabia Chowdhury is the woman who brought Adnan Syed's case to Serial. So Undisclosed, the first season, is kind of her response to Serial and the things that she thinks Serial didn't do right, which in itself is gripping. The thing that I found really interesting about that podcast is obviously because she has a personal connection to the case. You hear it comes across, and it's completely understandable. It's absolutely understandable given the circumstances. The thing that I found really interesting about it is that I find when I listen to it, I'm fully on board the free Adnan campaign. I'm like, yes, I fully believe it. And what I wanted to kind of, communicate with the book is that, I do think Rabia Chowdhury is right. But it would be very easy to get swept up, in the kind of same mood of someone who is potentially wrong. And so that was really instructive for me, in a kind of way of, I could definitely see myself getting carried away, believing someone was innocent than they were.
We definitely listen to different kinds of true crime podcasts, because the only one I listen to is the last podcast on the left, and
that's a great one.
it's hilarious. I love it. Anyway, Chris, let's move on to our staple questions, and we will move on after that to questions from the community. So, guys, if you have them, start thinking about those and send them in very shortly. But Chris, let's get that done.
Yeah, so the first of our staple questions, Katie, is if you could take any character from fiction and make that character your own, which character would you choose and why?
Oh my God, that's such a good question. That's a brilliant question. I would probably, it feels really, really old hat to say Amy Dunn from Gone Girl. You know, I just think she's brilliant. You know, it's almost too obvious because she's so gripping. In that moment where that book just spins on its head, that narrative voice there is just unbelievable. And it's one of those things where, you know, I don't know many writers who've read that book and not thought, God, I wish I'd written that.
What would you do with the character?
I mean, I would probably have her getting up to all sorts of mischief. You know, I mean, obviously, I thought Gillian Flynn did a great job of being, you know, I think she played it exactly right. You know, in that she had just the right amount of evil, but then she came home. But what I would probably want to do is, so I personally, you know, I mean, I've done it in Graham Catton, but like I am fascinated by non-marriage psychological thrillers. You know, like I think, like I say, I have just done it, so I'm an absolute hypocrite in saying it. But you know, I do think there is a lot of mileage to be found in, you know, psychological thrillers that kind of explore relationships between friends, for instance, rather than just kind of the, you know, the married couple, the wife and the husband, you know, in conflict with each other. The reason I didn't do that with this one was because I'd just done it with the Furies to an extent, but it was obviously teenage girls. I would love to see Amy Dunn kind of interacting with, you know, a group of female friends, ideally one of them who's kind of just as evil as she is. You know, I think I would enjoy that death match.
Yeah, that's like a mind-blowing concept. That I'd love to see that as well.
Yeah. Okay, so the second question in that respect would be, if you could change the ending to any story, whether it be literature, TV, or film, and do whatever with that ending, what ending would you change and why?
Oh my God!
It doesn't have to be bad. It can be good, but either way.
Okay. Probably. Like, the thing is, so Breaking Bad, it's not that I would change. It's not that I would necessarily change the ending. It is that I would not do El Camino. I felt like Jesse Pinkman was hard done by with that ending, because I think the ending to Breaking Bad was perfect. You know, I think that they, you know, the way that they tied up every loose end was brilliant. You know, everybody kind of got an answer. I felt, you know, complete. And I felt like Walt, you know, getting the ending that he got was right. But the fact that they sort of gave Jesse this escape, and he looked happy and he looked relieved as he drove away.
Spoilers.
Yeah.
I'm joking. If you haven't watched it, you should have. No, I know what you're saying, but I have not watched El Camino, so I couldn't comment on that. But
I wouldn't bother.
No. There you go. Just the answer is delete El Camino.
Delete El Camino. I just think retconning more bad stuff onto a character that is supposed to be getting the happy ending is not what I asked for.
Yeah, but that's a fair shout.
Yeah.
So, Katie, we've got two more staple questions that we'll throw in. The first one is, if you had to resurrect a writer from history to collaborate with on the condition that you then had to kill that person, who would you resurrect and how would you kill them?
Oh my God. I would probably resurrect, there's a modernist writer called Juna Barnes. I did my master's thesis on her. She is, so she wrote a book called Nightwood, and it's a work of, it's one of those books that, you know, it took me about 3 goes of reading it before I understood it. But when it clicked, I was like, I just adored it. It's an amazing book. But the words that she used to describe it were, it was written in ink with the blood still warm or something. So she basically took apart her ex on paper, and kind of implied that the ending of the book is her having sex with the dog. Kind of.
So, did you just say woof, Chris?
No, I didn't.
Oh, woof. It was very close.
I wish I had, but I didn't. I was like, oof.
Oh, right, oof. I thought you said woof. That's it.
That would have been a better. That would have been a good response.
Yeah, that would have been better. Yeah, definitely.
So I mean, I'm sure my PhD tutor is probably dying inside at my description of Nightwood. But what I'm getting at is, I would like to resurrect Juna Barnes, get the gossip, have her spill the tea on that relationship properly for me, answer all the questions that I definitely got wrong in my master's thesis, looking back a decade later, and then I would kill her. That would be fine.
Wow.
Nice. Love it.
How would you kill her?
And then, yeah, that's true. How would you?
How would I kill her? I mean, she seems like someone who would not notice what I put in her drink. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't think she'd look. So
Everyone goes to poison. It's a popular
Yeah.
choice.
And then the last question is, we have a lot of writers on the show that obviously watch the show, that are inspiring writers and want to be writers, and people who, have vastly experience, have written 10 books, watch the show, and people who are just starting out. So what advice would you give to somebody who's just starting out?
I mean, it kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier, but I think preparing yourself, accepting right from the outset that it is okay and actually good to fail at stuff. Like, appreciate your bad drafts for what they are. I always have several bad drafts before I have anything good. I don't know very many writers that say that what they write the first time is perfect, and if there's any out there, then they are my sworn enemy. That's it. I do think that it's really, really important to not be too hard on yourself, but equally be able to take a critical eye to what it is that you're doing. I was going to do a shameless plug here, but I was I'm doing the mentoring. I'm doing 6 months of mentoring on the Books for Vaccines project, but I did the same thing a few months ago for Books to Nourish, and the girl that I've been working with on that, like, she's been brilliant, because she's very much able to see what needs to be changed about her work, and also take on that criticism and kind of run with it. And I think that's a skill that not many people have. It's really hard to kind of get that, like, thick enough skin to accept criticism, but openness to change. It's a delicate balance, and I really do think that is that's essential. It's a real key part of the journey.
Love it.
How many, when you spoke about your multiple drafts, how many drafts kind of do you go through? And for people that are watching, obviously, if they're starting out as writers, you mentioned that some people, very, very few people, nail it. Maybe one, not really one, but one or two drafts. But, like, how many do you go through? And so people can know that it's kind of normal to go through more than 2 or 3 or 4.
Yeah, I mean, the Furies. So the Furies, I think, went through, I want to say 4. Okay. Before I submitted it to my agent, and obviously then it went through multiple rounds of edits. The Graham Catton, I think I wrote, I'm gonna say, like, I think it was 5 full edit, as in full drafts, that went to my publishers and got sent back to me for not being good enough.
Wow.
In one form or another, and I'm man enough kind of to admit that, in a public forum, like, I found it really, really hard to write that second book, and I think it is one of those things that people don't really talk about. You kind of have this idea of, what being a novelist is, and it's, very chill, and very, the inspiration just flows, and it's magic, and it's kind of witchcraft, and everything's wonderful. And actually, a lot of the time, it's kind of staring at your screen, thinking, I'm never going to be able to do
this. Belief is key. Okay, yeah, so what we're going to do now, just before you guys send some questions in, which you can start doing if you like, we're going to introduce a new family member to the show, Katie. And what we do is someone who's recently followed us on Twitter, who may have a small following. We give them a shout out and we send them a barrage of gifts. from the people watching, listening back, whatever you want to do. So that person today, I will play the video and I will announce the person. Oh, it's a good job you can't see my camera when that's on. I always have a dance. So that person today is Betsy Blakesley, at Betsy Blake SLEE, all one word. She is writer, director, World Harmony Chorus, and director, Expressive Arts Refuge, and principal. So be on your best behavior, Chris. She has 43 followers. That is her. She has recently followed us. And so, Katie, what GIF or what kind of GIF are we going to send this person?
You're talking GIF as in like GIF the image, not gift, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Am I sending them a present?
That has happened with our one of the guests we hope it wouldn't happen with was Ian Ranking actually sent a physical gift to somebody as a result of this.
I mean, I will quite happily send Betsy a gift. I'm more than happy to do that.
He literally sent a signed, like, two-of-a-kind beer mat from his local pub that is a famous pub to someone as a result. It's incredible.
God, that's amazing.
It blew our minds. But no, we're talking about GIF, GIF.
GIF. Okay. I think we should send something along the lines, something with crime in it. I think we should send. Freak her out a little bit, If in doubt, freak them out. Let's see it.
Well, I like it.
I've gone with that GIF.
Yes, super hands is always the right GIF.
Yeah, definitely. I like that one. I love the fact that the scope was so large with crime. It was gave you a good option.
Connor just wrote on the chat, I can tell Mary isn't paying much attention. Agate just said, how many times does it take you to nail it? And nothing for Mario. Did I say that? I can't remember saying that.
I can't believe I missed that.
Anyway, start sending the questions in, guys, for our guest and for us. If you have questions for us or the guest, we'll answer them all together. Why not? So do that, please. And Chris, have you sent a gift? You did.
Yeah, I did. Crime
Fantastic.
is the secret ingredient. So remember that, people.
There it is. Okay, so we have writing community question time, and I will play the video, Chris, just to make you happy. This is the time that you guys can ask us questions, and we haven't had any yet. So we'll wait for you to ask some. And in the meantime, we'll ask Katie some ourselves. Katie, are you a fan of the kind of adventure films? And we're going to talk about one. Me and Chris like to have a battle with some questions, but this is a standard one. Do you like Star Wars more than, say, Star Trek? Which is your favorite of that?
Oh God, I'm about to embarrass myself now because I'm not very in the know when it comes to those films. I've seen Star Wars, I have not seen Star Trek, so
Star
I'm gonna
Wars,
have to say Star Wars. I mean, the thing is, to my mind, the only film in that genre at all that matters is Independence Day, and I'm not even sure it counts as being in that genre. But I watched that again tonight, and it's a banger. It's so good.
That is a great film.
I love that.
Yeah. Did they make a sequel to that? Yeah.
If it does, I refuse to acknowledge it.
Yeah, let's not talk about that.
No. Connor says, any hidden talents that have nothing to do with writing?
Well, I'm a violinist. That was always the thing that I was supposed to be when I grew up.
According to
my parents.
Oh, okay.
And according, I mean, this is the thing these are the things that I unpick in therapy, but I was I did my grade 7 and then I broke my wrist. So then I had no
violin career.
I will not play this again.
Yeah, I was like, sick of this. Throwing myself down a flight of stairs,
Yeah, Mario says he loves musicians, and he does.
Oh, he's
what's he called? A conductor? Mario's a conductor.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, Chris, have you got any hidden talents?
No, I haven't got any visible talents, let alone hidden ones.
Yeah,
I'm sure that's
I can do that. That's about it. It's not very hidden. I just did it.
I can't do that.
Mario says, "What's your favorite part of the writing process?"
It's probably the point where you've got a cohesive enough draft that you can start making edits that feel like they're making it better, rather than edits that feel like they're just salvaging anything from the wreck.
Yeah.
Like there's a point for me where, I'll go back and add in scenes where I think, oh, that's, that is actually improving the world. And there's a point where the characters actually start to feel like they're doing their own thing, and you're not having to force it. It doesn't feel like you're just kind of making them do things, and it doesn't work, and it's all very wooden, and it's puppetry, and it's awful.
Fantastic. I like. No, it's a good answer. Okay, we've got a couple more there. Linda says, if you could be sucked into any literary world, which would it be?
Oh,
that's a good question.
Oh, that's so good. I'm looking around my study at my books to see if there's anything that jumps out at me. I think I love Leigh Bardugo. And I think I did an event with her a few years ago, last year maybe, and I hadn't read any of her books before we were due to be on stage together, and I read all of them in about a week and a half.
Wow.
They're so absorbing, and they're so much fun. And the world, it's kind of this it's sort of Russian-ish, but it's like fantasy, and oh god, I just loved it. So I would probably say, anything written by Leigh Bardugo.
Fantastic. You got some good comments coming on the back of that question. Thank you, Linda. Okay. Connor says, a question to add to Linda's. If you could send your worst enemy to any fictional world, which is a great question, where and why? It's a good question.
Oh god. I'm trying to think of the worst place that I've ever read in fiction. It would probably be one of those, those awful literary fiction novels from the 80s where everybody's just going to dinner parties and boring each other all the time. And they're like, everybody speaks in, they're speaking at each other rather than to each other. I'd probably send someone to one of those.
I think I'd quite enjoy that. I mean, I'd be like, I've been marooned somewhere. Where is it? Oh, there's a buffet and loads of wine. Oh, lead me to it.
Yeah, I mean, the wine is the only selling point.
Yeah.
Failing that, it'd probably be one of the worst bits of Game of Thrones. A point at which those scenes where everybody dies. It's just brutal. Everybody gets it. That's probably where I'd put my worst enemy.
Oh, fantastic, Chris. Have you got any additions? Have you got an idea?
Yeah, I'd send them to go and be Miss Marple's next door neighbour. Because you literally couldn't do anything.
Fair enough. Why not? Okay, Katie, we're going to have to wrap it up as we are just about to hit the hour. But before we do that, what we want to do is we want you to tell people where they can find your work, your websites, your book pages. Where can they get hold of your books?
Amazing. So Murder of Graham Catton is out on the 10th of June in the UK. That is known as Posession in the US. So that's already out there. You can buy it from all good bookshops, but if you buy it from anywhere that's brick and mortar in the next week or so, I will DM me on Twitter about it with a receipt. I will send you a little signed thingy to stick inside it. Nice. Like to support our local bookshops. And also I am, as I mentioned, on Books for Vaccines at the moment. I'm doing six months of manuscript mentoring. So it's a Zoom call once a month to run through your manuscript. I will, look at 50 pages of new work after I've read your whole book at the start. Wow. And at the moment, the bidding on that is about 150 quid or something, which is not bad going for 6 months of my time. So, so that expires in 2.5 days, I think. So if anyone wants to bid on that, please do it.
We genuinely didn't know that had anything to do with that when we were plugging it earlier either. So very well timed. That's fantastic. Yeah. So you mentioned it's already out in the US and it's coming out in the UK here. Why, just out of interest, why do they have different names?
It's purely my publisher's decision. The original title for this book was Conviction, but Conviction is the title of a very, very popular book by Denise Mina, who is obviously, brilliant. And the decision was we are not competing with Denise Mina. We're not even going to try. So we had to come up with a different title. I came up with a couple. Turned out the publishers in the US and the UK both like different ones. So
it's amazing, isn't it? They different covers, different names, but in different areas. So I find that bizarre. But anyway, guys, thank you so much for joining us and being part of our audience and part of the show. Katie, we can't thank you enough. And we will see you on Friday with Will Carver. He's back on the show from season 1.
Will Carver's back, and he has written a banger in terms of the Beresford, and I can't wait to chat to him about that as well on Friday, so it's going to be brilliant.
Brilliant. For all of us, guys, please stay safe, look after yourselves, and we'll see you Friday. Thank you, Katie. Been a pleasure, and we will talk to you very shortly after the show. Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye.